This is Swarfcast. I'm Noah Graff. I am very honored to be with Jose Palomino, founder and CEO of Value Prop and the host of the Business Growth on Purpose podcast. Welcome to the show, Jose.
Oh, no, good. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, this is fantastic to have you. First, Jose graciously had me on his podcast, and that was a fantastic episode too. And hopefully, maybe I'll replay it on this podcast. So, just to get started, I would like just a quick overview of Value Prop, and then I'm going to touch on your story a little bit, and then we'll dig deeper.
Fantastic, Noah. So thank you for that. Yeah. So Value Prop, for the last better part of the last 18 years, we work with owner operators of B2B companies, usually in the lower to mid size of the mid market, right? So privately held. And we focus on strategy. And then once you get strategy right, how to stand up the right kind of marketing and sales processes you need to implement that strategy, all with a mind towards growth. It's like, how do you start growing, especially when you have companies that have grown to a certain plateau and then they get stuck. And it's getting the unstuck part that I really enjoy working with them. And that's where we get, I think, a lot of kind of the bang for the buck, so to speak.
The term stuck and unstuck has significance for me. I have a life coach, and I did have a podcast coach too. That's kind of wound down, but I find stuck and getting unstuck is, it's a term we use, and it's such an important thing. And you help people become unstuck, and you'd also say that you help people find clarity, which is a key to becoming unstuck. Can you tell about that, like how you help a company find clarity in where they're going, and then we'll flesh this out.
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting. You reflected on like personal coaching type situations. And that's complicated enough to get yourself unstuck. Let's say, if, on some performance issue, some aspect of your life and so on. But now, just fast forward, imagine now you're running an organization with, even a small organization with 25, 30 employees, and you've been going at it for 20 years. And you realize, boy, we just haven't been able to crack 8 million, or we haven't been able to crack, 5, whatever kind of, that range. You're just there. You're kind of stuck. That's a stuckness that in some ways it's more complicated in a different way because there's more moving parts that are outside your head. They're the organization. There's how people perform and so on. It could be as simple as I can't get, and I've heard this from owners, lament. The owner's lament is, why can't I get people who care as much as I do about the business? And I always tell them, well, reality check, they're not the owner. When you exit, you might get a few $1,000,000 for your business. When they exit, they get a thank you. So they're never going to be as passionate as you. So we want to look at, first of all, the processes by which you're trying to grow your business. What do you think you're doing on purpose? And that's why we even, that's kind of our, for lack of a better term, our tagline is really business growth on purpose. Like, what are you doing intentionally? And all too often you have companies that are kind of, they've parked themselves in what they've been doing for the last 5, 7 years. The reason you haven't grown is because you're doing the same things that you've done the last 5, 7 years. You're working with the same companies. And maybe those are perfectly good companies, but maybe you haven't explored other opportunities to work with them. You haven't really challenged yourself to think about other possibilities. So that's one of the first things we look at is just let's analyze, let's take a deep dive look at we break it down to 48 dimensions that could affect or constrain growth. And everything from, certainly the most obvious ones are like your website. That's an obvious one, right? If your website sucks, it may not attract the kind of companies you want to work with and so on. But it could be working capital. It could be your own company culture, that when people answer the phone, Ajax Welding or whatever, they answered the phone. Yeah, it's Charlie here. What do you need? Well, that's not exactly inviting. And as the owner, you never know that's the way people are answering the phone because you never call your office that way. Because when you call directly to whoever's in your office manager and you get routed to the person you need to right away when you're on the road. That isn't the experience your customers have.
So you
So
you're
that
you're going like really detailed in
absolutely, we start there. You have to have an assessment. Look, it comes down to this, right? So like, doctor, I can't breathe when I go up the stairs, right? So stethoscope comes out, they check your pulse, but then they might do, everything from an angioplasty to, a CAT scan or whatever. They have to dig in to find out what's going on. That's always the first thing. And it's going to be it's blood work, it's whatever, to kill the metaphor, but it's the idea that you got to get into it deeply. Because again, you're running, it may not be the biggest company in the world, but it's a $10 million company. It's 40 people counting on this business to run to make their livelihoods. It's your entire, if you're an owner of that operation, that is the center or maybe the primary holder of your personal wealth is your business. You've put it all, your house is second, but your business, you're hoping that's what you're going to exit with, right? You think. You talk to buddies who sold out and oh yeah, I got 8 times multiple EBITDA. Oh, maybe that's my fate or not. I don't know. So we really need to understand what might be the hidden constraints that keep you from growing. And they're not always obvious. It could be things like, what I always call perhaps the greatest sentence ever developed, in marketing is when they instituted and operationalized this sentence. Would you like fries with that? Would you like fries with that? Simple question. But once it became operationalized, billions and billions and billions of dollars of revenue and market valuation came out of that one simple sentence. Now, and they operationalized it. They made it standard operating procedure for every, Mickey D's in the world, right? They have to ask that question. Do you want fries with that? It sounds dumb, but I've worked with companies that make machines, like in packaging and so on, and they don't, and they know there's wear parts that go with that machine, and yet they say, oh no, they pick up the wear parts. Let's say it's a pretty commodity type part that's available on Granger or something like that. And I said, well, what if you offered it as a subscription? Because every 6 months they're going to need to replace that, whether it's a gasket or it's a piston or whatever it is in your machine. So you say, wow, I hadn't thought of that. And so you start thinking about things like that, things that can unlock revenue and value, but you have to dig into the details. You can't just come out over the top and say, oh, you obviously just need a new website.
Sure.
Well,
So
maybe you do, maybe you
you
don't.
come in with a whole toolbox of stuff that you've observed over decades, and then you kind of do a triage, and then you go, all right, well, this is one weakness, I have this thing. This is another weakness, I have this thing. And then you kind of plug it all in. And I'm assuming sometimes you invent a new remedy for a problem.
Sure. Sure. So what we do, when we look at the 48
So let's
dimensions,
let's let's go back. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, no worries.
Okay. So I want to give some really like specific scenarios. Say you're a precision machining company. You're pretty diversified. Maybe you're maybe I don't know. Maybe you're 40% medical and 20% automotive and some aerospace, etc. 5 million. You're making precision parts. Okay, you're not growing, or you're just feeling stuck in some way. All right. They call you. What's the first thing that you do to evaluate it? And then we'll talk about some typical problems that they might have. I mean, you already
Sure.
went over a few, but I want to see what's your process, and then what are some of the common problems we can solve for people.
Yeah. Well, it always starts first with an interview with the owner. And I always like to get kind of into their heads what they think their issues are. And, they've been running the business 20 years. They probably have feelings or beliefs. They could be right, they could be wrong, but they nonetheless are what's governing their thinking. And it often sounds like, I used the example before, why don't people care as much as I do? Or why can't I find a sales rep who actually works hard, is willing to put in 60 hours the way I did when I started the business, and I was working on weekends and stuff. I can't find that person. So any of those issues, I want to surface those top level issues. But then what we want to do is go through those, usually with the leadership team.
Okay. So you
Go,
don't just talk to the leader, to the owner.
no, no,
You
no.
you
That's,
have to go to various
oh
levels
yeah.
in order to
And,
really understand what's going on.
and I tell the owner, I need to speak to your leadership team in some context, depending on what we're digging into, with you present, and in some context, just one-on-ones with them privately and confidentially. I need to know what's really going on. Even further, I want to talk to some of your customers. Now, those, people can get skittish about that and say, well, I don't want to upset the balance that I have. And I said, well, listen, if you have an at-risk customer, then let's not use that one. But if you have somebody who you've been working with, who's loyal to you, who you feel you have a great relationship with, and hopefully you have at least a few of those, then just tee it up that I just want to talk to them. And I'm not going to interrogate them. I just want to get a sense for them, especially not why do you do business with Acme if Acme were my client, but what is the criteria by which you choose to make purchases in this category? Like, when you need a new precision part, don't tell me about Acme. Just tell me, how do you go about doing that? Buying has changed, as you know, has changed radically in the last 20 years in B2B. And the balance has tipped greatly from things being sold to now things are being bought 80% through the buying cycle before they even reaching out to a vendor.
Yeah.
People are much more informed. They're there's a lot more educational material and stuff. The old days of a sales rep saying, I'm going to show up and educate you on the basics, that's gone. That's the people you're selling to already know. They want to get to brass tacks. So the first thing is just really get to know the people, understand and then I want to break down some of the key processes. I might ask, for example, how do you land a new client? What do you do? What's that look like? And then how do you expand that client once you've had some initial success with them? What does that look like? And they might go like, I don't know what you mean. And it literally, I've heard that. I don't know exactly what you mean by expand. I said, well, how do you grow that relationship? Do you only do one thing for people? And they say, oh no, we do this. We do, we can do custom, I don't know, welding, grinding, whatever we
Yeah.
do, in addition to making precision parts. I say, oh really? But do people know that? Do your customers know that you do those other things? And usually the answer is something like hands up, like, I don't know if they know. And that's the stuff that signals to me that certain communication, content, outreach isn't
So that's
happening.
really interesting. Telling people reminding people a service that you do something interesting, and maybe you just, in your mind, you just figured, well, of course we do that. But um maybe they don't even realize how good of a thing you're doing for them.
Or did you even do it at all, Noah?
Or
That's the thing.
yeah,
They don't know because you see, so I know, let's say I have a big account. It's my key account. And I've learned about that business. I know a lot about that business and so on. Let's reverse it a little bit. That key account, I don't know, let's say it's $1 billion company. It's not necessarily Fortune 500, but it's a pretty big company. They're a key client for me in my precision, use the example, precision parts. How many vendors do they have to deal with in their day-to-day life just to do everything they do? Right? How many categories is that? How many subcategories is that? How many different relationships is that? Trust me, they're not studying you to figure out what else you can do for them. They figure if you have something to tell them, you'll tell them. And if you don't tell them, they'll Google search or they'll call the next person on their list. And all of a sudden you find that when you call on them, when you finally do mention that you do these other things for them, you find that they actually gave your that business to some competitor, 5 years ago, 3 years ago. And they'll say something like, really? You do that too? And you're going like, oh, yeah, isn't it obvious? No, it's not obvious.
Yeah. Well, I always, one of my favorite sayings, I think I stole this from my dad, is that nobody is a mind reader. And
I love it.
when you maybe my old barber, she to some extent was, but there's like nobody else. And um once you try reading somebody's mind, or somebody tries reading your mind, everything goes to hell. So I think that's probably, yeah, that's got to be one of the things you go in and you try to instill in people.
Just an awareness that, especially in a lot of old line industries, I hear this,
Well,
and I understand where
what's
it's,
an old line industry?
well, like most contract manufacturing would be in that category, right? Where people have been making parts for Caterpillar for the last 25 years. It's a part that goes into the brake assembly or something
Yeah,
like
well,
that, and it's
we
just
have
been there
yeah,
forever.
okay, we have plenty of
Yeah,
that.
right. So what happens is, when you ask them, how do you get new business? They'll say, well, very proudly, they'll say, well, word of mouth, just our reputation.
Yeah,
And I say, well, so in other words, you don't do any intentional outreach or business development. That may be part of the explanation for why you've been at this plateau for the last 8 years.
right.
Or even worse, you tell me, well, we used to be 15 million. And I said, well, what have you been the last 5 years? Well, more like 8 million. Well, then you're 8 million. You can't tell me what you used to be. It's like a baseball team and say, well, we won the World Series 30 years ago. It doesn't count. It doesn't really count for today. So I guess my point is, there's a certain amount of intentionality, and it's a bridge that takes a little bit of courage to cross, to go from, we used to just wait for the phone to ring, and it would ring because we had these great long-term relationships with these major manufacturers, except for something that's happened, and it will always happen in the real world, which is that person, Larry in procurement, who was like a best friend, used to be able to take him to lunch and so on. You can't do that anymore, and Larry's retired. It's been replaced by a Gen Zer who doesn't know you, doesn't care, doesn't ever want to meet
Doesn't
you,
want to talk on the phone.
doesn't want to talk on the phone, and basically is using a procurement portal to put out a 3 bid automatically to the three. Your best bet is to maybe be a registered vendor, so you get invited to bid on something in a reverse auction, for a part or something. And I'm thinking, okay, so you got to do something different if you expect a different result.
Yeah,
Now, there's no magic here, right? There's no like, hey, just hire 10 salespeople and magic happens. Of course not. Every business is different. Every industry, sub industry could be different. So, to answer your original question, I need to understand that first before saying do this or that, because candidly, I don't, it could be different in every situation. But you gotta at least identify what those markers are and what might actually be throttling. And I like to use that visual that is throttling your growth. Something is stopping you from growing. You went from 0 to 4 million, from 4 million to 8 million, then you stopped growing. What happened? What changed? And that's what we want to dig into, because until we identify that, we can't, it's like a health issue. You got to identify the root cause
yeah.
or else you can't
So
fix
are
it.
you looking inside the company first before you even get to the advertising and promotion?
Yeah,
It
I like, yes,
seems like it's two different talent sets too. I mean, how much are you doing it by yourself? Do you have a pretty big team doing that?
yeah, no, I have a few folks on my team, including a partner, and then a few other folks that work on project management and things like
Do you
that.
have somebody
Yeah.
who's more specialized in dealing with, inside the company versus somebody with sales and marketing, or you just do the whole thing?
Yeah, well, so let me expand on the do the whole thing statement, right? Because that's really the important thing. We won't do website design or SEO, because we feel there's specialty agencies that do that work very well. However, the however part, it's like, this is what typically happens in small businesses. It's like buying a plot of land, and all of a sudden you hire a bunch of contractors, all specialists, plumbers, electricians, etc. But you don't have a blueprint. So you say, okay, here's my land, build me a house. Well, what kind of house are you going to get? You're going to spend a lot of money. I mean, it won't be for lack of budget, right? You'll spend a lot of money. So inevitably, I was just talking to a company owner today, And I said, well, you probably spent a lot of money on your marketing in the last 20 years. He says, absolutely. On one agency after another, new website redesign, all these different activities. But there wasn't a real plan. So our focus is on giving you and helping owners develop a plan with their leadership team that they can live with, so they can give guidance. And sometimes we get involved in helping them find, identify, and onboard an agency to do the different pieces of work that need to be done, right? But if they're already working with somebody, we're not a competitor to them because we're not a marketing agency. So we're like, hey, but here's the thing: most owners in most industrial categories don't know how to manage or guide or direct these specialty firms. The SEO firm routinely has like that monthly meeting and says, here's our 40-page report of analytics. Look how good we're doing. We improved this keyword performance, that one. And the owner, I've been on these meetings. No, the owner's like, okay, sounds good. I have no idea what you just said, but it sounds good.
So should the owner probably have somebody employed whose job is to oversee that? Is that one of the solutions?
Yes, and maybe. Okay, so it really depends on scale.
The problem is that the owner still has to oversee what that person's doing.
Yeah, sure. So that's why we want to develop a really good game plan with the leadership team, so we know what we're going out to solicit. Much as kind of reverse the reality that they're dealing with from procurement buying from them, they have to have the same edge as a small business. The challenge with them bringing somebody full-time in-house is this: if you're an $8 million company, you're not likely to be able to hire a $200,000 chief marketing officer. Just not the right scale. You're just not going to do that. So you end up hiring somebody who just graduated from the local college with a degree in marketing. Still not the right person. So you're not going to get you're not going to get the results you wanted. What you really need is, if you have the right game plan, and this is where we come in, we help them talk to the agency, give guidance to the agency in language the agency understands. And it also helps that agency know that that owner has somebody on their side who understands the truth of how these things really should work. And then they end up actually bringing their A game, because they now know, okay, I'm going to have to give, like I've challenged people on those 40-page SEO reports and AdWord reports. I say, look, bottom line, we spend this amount of money. This is how many phone calls we got. This is how much business we got. We need to improve that ratio. All that other stuff is stuff. It's important at a very technical level. It's important, and we understand that. But that's not the objective. The objective is not to improve rankings per se. It's to improve rankings so that people might actually fill out the contact form and turn into business.
Sure. It's got to have purpose and get the result you want. Okay. I mean, there's so many places we can go with inside the company. But let's stick to sales and marketing right now. What's more important, sales or marketing? Or we could say what's more important, or what are people's weaknesses you find? Let's stick to contract manufacturer, because that's who we're really trying to direct this at.
So I would say it's probably two things. Let me divide marketing into two components, right? So there's marketing strategy, which I want to call out very distinctly from marketing communications. So marketing communications, I put in that bucket everything from website to content strategy to emails going out, all that stuff that's basically putting words on paper, or PDFs.
What about would you consider podcasts in that?
Yeah, podcasts could be part of that strategy as well, but that's the execution side of it. And you need to have good execution. Your website should not look like it's from 1998. These are things that, and those are fairly easy fixes today, because there's a lot of stuff out there that makes that more doable than ever before, and more cost effectively than ever before.
Absolutely.
But marketing strategy for a contract manufacturer is something they often just don't look at. And really what it comes down to is, who is really our ideal target customer beyond who I happen to be serving today? Because that may not be, I had a client once that dealt with a very large OEM, and they were making a precision part for them for many years. But when we did value stream analysis as to where they actually made profit, the real margin generation, this contract was about 50% of their top line revenue, but was the least profitable value stream that they handled. And so you're not going to make it up in volume if you're losing money. You're buying steel, you're putting, you're running labor, and then you have to get paid in 120 days from this company that could buy and sell you 1,000 times over today, with chump change. I mean, so like, why are you their bank? That makes no sense. So we repriced that value stream. And they said, we're going to lose a lot of the orders. I said, yes, but they were losing you money. So you're losing a loss.
Yes.
And what you end up keeping will be profitable.
Some of the most successful people that I know have said we're definitely not afraid to fire vendors and stand up to them. Not vendors, but customers.
Yeah, sure. And you have to, just to defend your business. And what happened was, when you did the analysis over like the 10-year arc of that business, it was very profitable year one, but every year they said, we need another 5%. We need another 5%. We're pulling your whole business. Another 5%. We're pulling your whole business. At some point, you run out of 5%. I mean, mathematically, you're paying them to do the work. So the first thing we look at is, who should your target customer be, really? And go into it even a little bit more deeply. Like in some cases in contract manufacturing, especially people who had really high level skills, like really some advanced operations they could do, they used to deal with the engineer. And they say engineers would recommend us. In some companies, engineers had the authority to say, this is the vendor you're going to use for this part. That's gone away to a large degree. Procurement now rules. So you have to think about, how do I manage those relationships? So the first thing is target. First part of strategic marketing, to answer your question, I'd say is, do we understand who we really want to get more of? And I do an exercise often.
Do we want to understand which kind of customers we want to get more of, you're saying?
Yeah. So let me say it a slightly different way. I especially a company that may have 50 clients or 150 clients on their client list. I said, which of these would you clone if you could? Which would you clone if you could?
It's a good question.
And then why? Is it just the volume? Is it because they're easy to deal with? Is it because they're fair with you on terms? Whatever the reasons are, or is it because
they pay awesome?
They pay awesome,
great margin,
or they actually take advantage of all these new machines we've just leased, over the last 3 years of when volumes are picking up. But we ended up really exposing ourselves, and we took on some new square footage, and these companies could take advantage of that. So first thing is your target customer. The second thing in a strategic marketing plan is, okay, great. I know why you want them. Why should they want you? You have to answer the other side of that question, which is your value proposition, right? Hence the whole company, value prop. I wrote the book on value prop. It's for this reason, because until and unless you can create a compelling answer to this question, why should anyone buy X from you at Y price? There's three things implied there, right? Well, four. Anyone is the target. X is, do you succinctly describe what you do? From you, that's important. Like, you want to show up in that category as the specialist, the best in that category on some dimension, and at Y price, that you can actually get the margins you want. If you can't answer that question crisply for that target customer you most want to do business with, then at that point, you're basically saying, we're just a raw commodity. The only reasons we win is on price. Well, you have to have other reasons. And it can't be stuff that comes out of a Hallmark card,
yes.
Where it's like trustworthy and, integrity and 50 years experience. I don't know. Is that good? 50 years experience in precision machining could tell me you have a lot of old machines. I don't know. I don't know what it actually means.
I mean, I suppose it means something. It means that you've been good enough that you've stood the test of time. But at the same time, you're right. It's like, it could just mean you're a survivor or you're old news.
Or it could be any of those things. So you have to surface, what is it? What is the compelling reason? So here's where it gets hard, and it really does get hard. There are times, and I've done this exercise with the leadership team, and they conclude that they don't know what's special about what they do.
Yeah.
And I say, okay, well, that's not good, but good news is identifying that. It's like,
And that
like
doesn't seem that hard to identify once sit down with
yeah,
somebody.
but you have to get in a moment of real transparency and honesty where people can actually say that out loud. And sometimes you have an owner, if the owner CEO is one of those like, I own and run this thing, and we're great because I said so. What you find is the leadership team. That's why I do like to speak to people on the leadership team individually. Is they're afraid to speak up and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
we've been outpaced by our competitors, or we haven't kept up with the technology, or our people are kind of surly when they deal with customers, and it's not
Oh, you're talking
customers are
about the
telling
painful stuff. I was just talking about what you were just talking about, finding the positives.
Oh well, the
That's
positive, yeah,
that's the funner.
yeah.
That's the more fun part. But yeah, obviously digging deep into the weaknesses. But you were saying, all right, what
Well,
advantages do
and
we
so
have?
you're right, and so the other side of that question then is when they tell me it's this, that, or the other thing, whatever those attributes are that they think set them apart. Then I say, okay, how do we validate that? Because I want to know that if I look at your competitive set, like just what I would find even through like just a web search, would I see the same words, ideas, and illustrations as what you're telling me set you apart? Because by definition, we call this equally credible claims. If there's two companies that to the average buyer look to be about the same size and capabilities,
Race to the
if
bottom.
they make the same claims, then they cancel each other out because I'm assuming, I'll
Right.
stipulate probably they both can do
And
it.
that's kind of one of the things why I was very curious about when you're talking about contract manufacturers. I mean, it's they're using the same machines, they're getting the same tolerances, they can brag about the same stuff. We've got great people. We've been around so long. We'll get you your stuff on time. So, I mean that it's a certain code to crack. It's not like a consumer product where it's you can just like show how much better your detergent is by how it cleans. I mean that's sort of a similar thing in a way too, but like with a car, you can at least show like, all right, it's got this feature, it's got this design. When the parts look the same, it's hard from the outside. I suppose if somebody like came and got a tour of your shop, got testimonials, uh, that might differentiate it, or that's
To
yeah.
some degree. And that's why you need to talk to customers. Look, I've talked to owners. No, this is one of my standard questions. When's the last time you, Mr. or Mrs. Owner, have personally had a conversation with your top 5 customers? And I mean, maybe you wouldn't be shocked, no, but the reality is well, I used to when I started, but I haven't in a long time. And I'm talking about like years. They haven't, unless there's a
That
problem.
is a really interesting thing to think about. I think about Graff Binkert's customers, our best customers. It's hard to define, I guess, because I mean, with our business, it's like you may have your best customers in the last year, and then some of these other customers you haven't talked to forever. Maybe when you have big contracts, big ongoing contracts for years, and you have it's clear you're 80/20, it's easier to do that.
Maybe. I mean, and again, I think once you have your definition, like who your ideal customer is, which, I know you do know, then the question is, even though this particular request for a machine is transactional, and that's the only reason these people know about us or we know about them. Once you start profiling them, you start saying, what else could we do for them?
Yeah.
What else should we be on the lookout for from an opportunity point of view? What might they want our help looking for them,
Yeah.
even if we don't have it available right now? And again, I'm not presuming to tell you
No,
all the
no.
different
I
ones you
mean,
do.
these are all the things that I'm thinking about. And if you listen to my last blog podcast, a lot of it was about why you talk to people on the phone. That's when the magic happens. That's when you really connect with people. That's when you set yourself apart. And that's when you really find out stuff. People email about one thing all the time, and then you don't know until you really talk to them. So it seems like that piece of advice of going and talking to the most important people makes a lot of sense. I'm going to deviate here.
Sure.
Do you ever, one thing I've considered doing, and I've done it a little bit, and it makes more sense maybe in our business, but talking to people that you haven't talked to in a while, like you go through your phone and you just look at like some names and you scroll through, who haven't I talked to in forever? Like, you find a text conversation from like 2 years ago. You ever try that, or you ever suggest that?
Absolutely. Give you a real world example. This is an earlier version of my business before Value Prop was formed. I was living in New York City, and I had been the chief marketing officer for a internet incubator that was actually pretty successful, and had some real marquee name accounts. And then the company blew up with the dot bomb, just totally like 2000 was
The
dead.
dot bomb. I like that.
The dot bomb, right? It was booming. There's a long story. I've said it on my blog before, but in April of 2000, I came home from our executive team meeting, and we had just taken on an institutional investor, and my options were worth $15 million. And my wife, very wisely, when I told her this, I said, honey, I got to tell you something is really profound, right? She said, can we spend any of it? And she was smart because it was restricted and so on. And then it all collapsed. Literally in 12 months, it went to
did
zero.
you get some out to spend it?
No, nothing. In fact, they owed me like $250,000 at the end of the exercise. So, which I've never, that's gone, it's poof. But so now, it's April 2001, and so I'm restarting an older consulting practice I had, working mostly with tech companies, and getting that going. And then 9/11 happens, and I'm in New York, and it felt like time stopped, right, for everybody. And I said, I can't afford for time to stop. We're in a new house. We have 2 kids at the time, and like, what do we got to do? So to your point, I took out a yellow pad and I said, I'm writing down every name I can think of anyone who will take my call, because I got to talk to people. I got to get out there. And this is, prior to Zoom and things like that, right? We're going back quite a while. But that exercise, I think, is a brilliantly correct and right thing to do to drive some immediate, like when you need to squeeze out some business, reach out to folks, especially as you said, that you got a text from somebody 2 years ago. Hey, Larry, I would tell them by phone. I was going through my phone for some, older
Right, and
messages.
this maybe is something you advise a company who's like, really in dumps. As you said, after the .com boom, the .com bomb. Yeah, I mean, so on the one hand, all right, go to your 5 biggest customers. Let's make sure we got going what we got going and understand what's going well with them, etc. But this is another play if you're feeling stuck and if you're in desperation to do that. That's really interesting. Okay, so you go to these best customers, you go to these 5 best customers. Then what do you say to them?
Oh, a couple of things. One is certainly, but you have to mean it when you say this question, when you ask this question. Just, I would start with a very general, like, just know, how are we doing? How are we doing for you? And I really want to hear the good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first thing, because first of all, I can't grow you if you're pissed off about something that my company's done poorly, but it never rose to the level of you're going to pull my business yet. But it's one of those grating annoyances that I may not be aware of, and you may not take the time to tell me until, and here's the thing, you choose somebody else, and the next communication to me is that you've replaced me.
Yes.
And now I'm done, because the switching cost to go back to me after you went out into the market, because in your mind, something I failed at caused you to want to do that. There's no grace at that point for you coming back to me. I've lost you forever.
Yes.
And that's what happens. So first thing, how are we doing?
And people
Second thing,
feel valued. People feel like you're listening to them.
And you have to really listen for the answer. Like you can't just say, okay, great, enough about you. Let me tell you about me. It can't be that.
Can't be
And then
can't
just
be
say,
transactional. Like what I find with the machinery business, it's bad, and I'll even admit it to people. Like what makes me call to check up on them is because I'm calling about some other opportunity for something we're looking for or something we have to sell. And then I say, well, how's that machine that we sold to you doing it? And I think to myself, man, wouldn't it have been a better thing had I called them another time? But I guess we're just so busy. We're so busy calling somebody to try to sell something new versus uh, going back to the people that feed you. Okay, so you first ask them genuinely, how are you doing? You listen, you show them you're listening. Um, and then what? What else do you ask them?
yeah, that I'm it, depending in part on what that answer is, because there may be some hooks in that answer that they give me, or they would give you if you were asking a question that leads you down a certain path. But then I would say, are there any, or is there anything you're working on now that you might need some help with? Whether it's the help you perceive I can offer you, or just something that you're challenged with right now.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most
Right, that's
powerful things
great. You ask them what their pain points are. And then they
period.
really
Like
feel like you're listening to them. That makes sense.
and I would be very careful, Noah, to point out, like, even say the words, like, whether you think it's anything we do for you or not, because we're connected in the business. If you're in the industry, we may know a resource, and that's the home run. If you can connect a client or a customer to another resource and you did that for them, you will solidify that relationship in a profound way. It's not a blank check, but it definitely helps, because nothing it's not the words of sincerity, it's sincere action. And that is hard to argue with. As a human being, you're gonna think, well, that guy's or that gal's cool for helping me out during that jam when I was looking for an operator, maybe, or I was looking for something that they could help me out with.
What do you think?
Then I'm
What do you think of say they say that you're weak in something, and you know you're weak in something, and you know that this really isn't your specialty, and you actually recommend a competitor? Um, is that is it best to just stay away from that, or maybe you take that on a case by case basis?
Yeah, I think there's a little case by case to it, but I would say it this way: if it's something you're weak at that you have no interest in strengthening, it's just the kind of stuff you get pulled into from time to
Makes
time,
sense.
then you might just say, like for example, I've done a lot of over the years of customized sales training, right, for different organizations where they just need some to think through their process differently, and so I love the process design piece of it. But the actual, like, implementation, or like, we're going to do ongoing sales coaching for your 5 sales reps, I'd rather point them towards like a Sandler, or this people I've interviewed on my show that I think could do a better job of
Uh
that,
huh.
because they want to do that. So where I get involved in it is when I usually have a bigger relationship with a client, that they just find it easier. Jose, can you help us with this? And they don't want to deal with another vendor or another supplier. They just want to keep it one stop shop. If the relationship is significant enough, overall, I'll probably say, okay, let's figure out a way to make that happen. But I like to point out people to other things. One of the reasons we're
Right.
not,
But it
we
could be
don't do.
dangerous to, you have to be strategic. You don't want them to like
Sure.
discover a total alternative. All right. So again, I interrupted you. So we got, let's see, we got pain points and recommending things that they can do, giving them some advice. And then what else?
Well, if I think I actually have an idea for them, and if these are strategic, important clients, I should be thinking with my team, hey, what else can we do for Acme Sprockets that you don't think we're doing for them? And usually the team collectively will say, oh, well, they've never asked us for this, but we could do that, and so on. So that third thing might be, I might say, Noah, first of all, thanks for bringing me up to speed on your situation. I'll look into that operator for you. And by the way, my team, we put our heads together and we thought there might be some opportunities for us to help you with something particular. Can I tell you a little bit about it? And make it one simple thing, not 15 things that you can do.
Okay.
They don't need to. They don't want you to recite your website to them. They have access to your website. But if you have a particularly clever idea for them, something like, hey, one thing that we've never done for you, but we're really good at is induction hardening. And I know you make some parts of that probably makes sense in your engineering. Is that something we should talk about? Because it's really something we do really well. We'd love to demonstrate that for you. They might say, well, what do you mean? And the moment they say, what do you mean? It's a wonderful thing, because now you have a conversation going around the thing that you want to talk about.
Yes.
And it's an easy conversation. And here's the thing, the predicate or the prefacing of it was, my team and I got together to think about how we can help you. And we came up with one good idea we want to share with you. Are you open to that? Of course you're open
Right.
to
And
that.
if they hear that you and your team were conferring about helping me, like, man, they're going to feel valued. And the
Absolutely.
next time they're trying to decide who else they should go to, they're going to think, all right, well, who's paying attention to me? You're going to be the top of their mind too. And they're going to think that, you care. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I could see, obviously not every single call is going to make you grow a gazillion percent, but that's a really, really profound thing to do. I guess we don't have that much time for any more questions, but we got a couple minutes. I'm very, and you're going to be, you deal with this obviously with your consulting and your coaching. What's the best way to give advice? Because I talk about this all the time now. I talk about the shoulds. It's like the obvious. It's like the worst thing you can say. You should do this because it's total judgment. So, all right. So they tell you their pain points. You have advice. It's not advice of, I can provide this, but you're just trying to help. What do you say? I suggest you do this. If I were you, I'd do this.
No, I'd stay away from
Feel free
those.
to ignore this advice. That's what I always tell people now.
Yeah, that's it depends, if they've asked, it depends how direct their question for, if they've asked a question for help, what do you think I should do here? That's one thing. And then even there, I would couch it the way you suggested, which is, listen, yeah, I'm not in your shoes, but it looks to me like, so something like that could be, it looks to me of the options you've looked at, this is it. That's if they're directional. But let's say you're in a different situation where they've described something they're going to do, like they're going to expand 20,000 square feet in this other location, and you happen to know that's not a great location for them for any number of reasons. Truck routes are going to change, or there's new tax laws, or something about. So even there, if I were to say, hey, that location is going to have that tax abatement is going to expire next year, I'm kind of telling the owner that they don't even know their own business.
Got to be careful.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a bit of an ego bruise, right? So I might, and I prefer to ask it, to frame it more as a set of questions. I might say, wow, that seems like a really nice space. What's the tax situation there? So that's a question that's going to lead them to, well, I don't know.
Right.
Why do you ask? Well, I know in some areas the tax abatements are being, they're terminating after 20 years, and people are finding, I was just reading about that or something like that. So you're not being that specific. You're not telling them they're an idiot, but you're giving them an opportunity to act on something that's
clever.
good for them.
That's clever.
So just asking questions. I'm looking to expand my sales team. Well, what? I'm just curious. What are you hoping to accomplish with 2 more sales reps than you have right now? Because you mentioned to me that you're having some difficulty with the people you have on board now. What would be different about these other people? I'm just kind of curious. And they tell, and you're making them talk through or think through their process that led them to that point. And I find that that's a way to really, because actually when I give advice, I actually want people to own the decision.
Yes. Right.
So I naturally go towards the question model, not because I'm avoiding responsibility or just because I don't want to tick somebody off, but more importantly, is I want them to think it through, because they'll come up with a better answer than if I just tell them, don't do that or do this.
That
I try to avoid that anytime I can.
that makes a lot of sense. Okay, rapid fire here. What's something really interesting that you learned, say, last week or recently? Or if you're having trouble with that, what's something interesting that you researched?
That I'm in the process of right now is just how real is all this in the near term, is all this AI development around for
Ah,
marketing, for content and stuff. And you're reading articles that say you're getting these crazy results in some cases and so on. But it seems more to me, I mean, if I were to draw a conclusion, not because I'm a super expert, but I do have a technology background. I'm saying whatever the deficiencies in AI is today to take the place of like somebody developing content and so on, those deficiencies are going to get smashed out of the system in the next 3 to 5 years. And you're going to have some real game changers that are going to happen, maybe sooner than that.
interesting.
I never felt that way when, I did a challenge at Villanova where I teach, and they did an entrepreneurial challenge. And one of the questions that the team's undergrads had to compete on was arguing for autonomous vehicles. And they were quoting reports that, 80% of vehicles in America will be autonomous by 2030. And I'm going, really? In 7 years, we're going to get rid of every gas vehicle? I didn't see that as possible. They didn't feel credible to me. I don't feel that way when I see things about AI. I think it's definitely happening, and it's going to they're putting a ton of money, resources, and even the early results now are pretty scarily impressive.
It is fascinating. You ever hear the Bill Gates quote? What is it? Things that they say are going to take 3 years will take 10 years, and things that they say are going to take 10 years end up taking 3 years. I
I've not heard that, but
It
that's
was something that
there's
was, I can't remember if I got the years wrong. I thought that was so interesting. Um and what if I'm into serendipity, and if it's hard to come up with something real quick, I get it. But is there any serendipity you encountered recently in anything in your life? Just like you didn't expect it. So you had a conversation with someone, and then all of a sudden it spawned this unexpected, interesting thing.
Wow, that's a really great question, though. I'm actually a little bit stumped right now because the moment you said
I should have
serendipity,
told you that before we started. That would have been
no, it's all good. But the one thing that will always stand out in my life in response to that question is a day a little over 35 years ago when I got on a subway car in New York City. There's one seat open. I sat down next to the person who would become my wife.
I can't think of a better
And
example than that. That's awesome.
that's my awesome serendipity example. There's been others, but that's the one
I
that
love
my
it.
mind immediately went
I
to.
love it. And do you have anything else you want to say to the people of the world, real quick?
Just I would say whatever the challenges, headwinds, and stuff that are happening in the world, business, recession, COVID, whatever, you got to keep your head in the game. Don't expect instant results on everything you do, but also there's something to be said, especially as an entrepreneur, like hard work, great relationships, integrity. Those things really do matter. And they do play out over the long haul. There is somebody every now and then, there's somebody you read about that got the proverbial lottery ticket. That happens, and that's not a plan. That's good fortune. That's serendipity.
And
But
it
a lot,
probably won't last unless
very likely, right? According to all the stats,
unless they really run with it.
right? But I think yeah. So I do believe I'm still very bullish on being an entrepreneur, being in business. I believe it is a great creative way to manifest who you are in the world in a way that makes a lot of difference for a lot of people. And that's still exciting to me.
Fantastic. I can tell that you have a tremendous amount of purpose, what you do. Before we close, just tell everybody where they can find your business and your website. and your
Sure.
podcast.
Sure. Well, everything can be found very easily at valueprop.com, and that's VALUEPROP, valueprop.com. And for those who want to, you can find me on LinkedIn easily enough. There aren't that many Jose Palominos, but you can
Yeah, I
find
was
me.
looking you up. The only one I could find was a soccer player.
Yep, that's the other one. So I'm not the soccer player. Let's put it that way. And but be happy
And the
to connect
podcast.
on
Don't
LinkedIn.
forget about the podcast.
And the podcast, you can find that on it at valueprop.com/podcast, and you'll find all the video versions of podcasts. It's also Business Growth on Purpose is on Apple, Google, Spotify, all the normal podcast channels for the audio piece.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome, Noah. It's been my pleasure.